Have you ever had a conversation that felt quiet on the surface, but emotionally violent underneath? Where the other person didn't raise their voice, but somehow you left feeling bruised? Or maybe you've been in relationships where you kept showing up, checking in, reaching out, giving second chances, and deep down you knew, I'm watering a dead plant. But you kept pouring because loyalty, because family, because they've been through a lot. But what if I told you that your compassion was being weaponized against you? That the guilt you feel every time you pull away isn't a sign that you're cold or selfish, but proof that you're finally waking up? Let me ask you this. How many times have you convinced yourself to stay because walking away felt too harsh, too final, too unkind? But kindness, without boundaries, is just self-destruction with good intentions. And the truth is, not everyone deserves a front row seat to your life just because they once helped build the stage. That includes old friends. That includes your boss. That even includes family. Because the people who expect your forgiveness without earning it, the ones who assume your presence without reciprocating, and the ones who use your values against you, are the ones who benefit most from your silence. The Stoics, 2,000 years ago, saw this clearly. Epictetus once taught, when someone tries to provoke you, remember, you are not their puppet. If you let go of the string, they have no power. But what happens when the person pulling the string is someone you once loved? Today I'll show you 9 signs that it's time to walk away. Yes, even from family or lifelong friends. Not because you're heartless, but because you've finally chosen peace over obligation. No pop psychology, no cut toxic people cliches. This is different. This is deep. This is raw. This is the psychology behind hidden harm, told through a lens of stoic clarity and quiet emotional power. Because sometimes the most damaging relationships are the ones that never look broken from the outside, but inside they're bleeding you dry. And you deserve to reclaim your energy, your boundaries, your peace. There's a type of person you've probably met before. They always say they're broke, always struggling, always not in a good place financially. And yet somehow, they never hesitate to ask for help, for your time, your effort, your kindness, your resources. But when it's your turn to need, even something small, suddenly they disappear. Suddenly they're busy. Suddenly they forget. And at first you don't mind. You think, they're going through a rough time. I'm in a better position. I should help. That's what friends or family do. But here's what you don't realize. It's not just money they're draining. It's your emotional credit. You're constantly overdrawing from your own reserves, your patience, your energy, your trust, all while they keep making withdrawals without ever making a single deposit. It's not that they're broke, it's that they've made taking their personality and giving nothing in return their habit. You see, the Stoics believe that generosity is only virtuous when it's rooted in discernment, not guilt. Seneca wrote, kindness must never look like submission. But that's what you've been doing, not giving, submitting. You keep saying yes. You keep downplaying your own needs. You keep forgiving broken promises because they say the right thing and play the victim better than anyone. But here's the hard truth. They're not struggling with money. They're comfortable using your conscience as currency. And the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more you start to resent yourself, not just them, because deep down, your mind knows what your heart doesn't want to admit. You're being emotionally manipulated under the banner of help, And it's never just about the money. It's about how they treat your support like a given, your time like a favor they're owed, and your boundaries like a suggestion they can ignore. You deserve better. Your kindness is not a vending machine. You don't owe access to people who only show up with empty pockets and full expectations. Because Stoicism isn't about being cold, it's about being clear. Clear about who adds to your life and who only takes. Control. There's a certain tension you can feel before they even speak. They walk into the room and everything stiffens. Their tone is sharp. Their words are coated in emotion. But it's never just about what happened. It's about who's on their side. Because to them, disagreement isn't a conversation, it's war. They don't argue to understand. They argue to dominate, to corner, to make you pick a side, even when the issue has nothing to do with you. At first, you try to stay neutral. You think, I'll just listen. I won't get involved. I'll be the peacemaker. But soon, neutrality becomes betrayal in their eyes. If you don't back them 100%, you're against them. If you show empathy to the other side, you're disloyal. If you refuse to take sides, they accuse you of not caring. And suddenly you're pulled into a storm that was never yours to begin with. This is emotional warfare disguised as conversation. It's less about resolution and more about recruitment. They don't want peace, they want allegiance. They want you as an echo, not an equal. But here's what Stoicism teaches. True peace isn't found in pleasing both sides. It's found in standing outside the drama with clarity, principle, and calm. Epictetus reminds us, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. And that's exactly what these people do. They provoke you, then punish you for not reacting the way they want. They'll bait you into arguments, then accuse you of overreacting. They'll twist your words, then demand loyalty. They create the fire, and then blame you for not bringing water fast enough. But you are not obligated to participate in other people's emotional chaos. You are not required to choose between two toxic paths just because someone hands you a fork in the road. Sometimes the wisest choice is to walk away entirely, because you were never supposed to choose sides. You were supposed to choose peace. And anyone who makes you feel guilty for doing that was never interested in peace to begin with. Dismisses it, you finally open up. Not to the world, not on social media, just to one person. Someone close, someone you thought was safe. You take a breath and begin to share. The anxiety you've been hiding, the weight that's been pressing on your chest for weeks, the heartbreak that's been slowly reshaping who you are. And then comes their reply, "That's not that bad. You're overthinking it. You should be grateful. Others have it worse." And just like that, you feel smaller, invalidated, alone. Because your pain wasn't just dismissed, it was downgraded. What hurts the most isn't that they didn't help, it's that they didn't even try to understand. They turned your moment of courage into a lesson on perspective. But Stoicism, real Stoicism, isn't about minimizing pain. It's about facing it with dignity. Seneca wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than necessary." But that doesn't mean suffering is shameful. It means it should be met with presence, not judgment. But people like this, they don't listen. They wait to speak. They don't hold space. They fill it with noise. And often they center the conversation around themselves. I had it worse. You think that's hard? Let me tell you what I went through. I don't get why you're so emotional. Now you're left sitting in silence, questioning yourself. Was I being dramatic? Am I really too sensitive? Should I just stop talking? That's what this type of person trains you to do. Stop expressing. Stop reaching out. Stop feeling. But here's the truth. Your pain is real, even if it's invisible. Your emotions are valid, even if they make others uncomfortable. And you deserve relationships where your voice is met with presence, not performance. Because those who constantly minimize your sadness aren't emotionally strong. They're emotionally unavailable. And you don't need a cheerleader when you're grieving. You need someone who says, I don't have to fix this, but I'm here, fully here. Sometimes the deepest form of love is simply holding space without shrinking someone's pain to fit your comfort. And if someone can't do that, they haven't earned access to your vulnerability, your imposed. It always starts with something subtle, a comment, a raised eyebrow, a quiet judgment wrapped in a smile. You're at dinner and someone mentions a worldview, a belief, a movement, and suddenly the atmosphere shifts, not because of what you believe, but because you don't believe exactly what they do. They don't ask, what do you think? They ask, why would you think that? And it becomes clear. They're not looking for dialogue. They're looking for agreement. You feel it when they quote scriptures, not to share truth, but to corner you. You feel it when every political topic ends with them saying, I just don't get how anyone could think differently. They disguise their certainty as concern, but concern shouldn't feel like coercion. What they want isn't unity, it's uniformity. You see, when people force their faith or politics onto you, it's rarely about what's right. It's about control. Control of narrative, control of morality, control of you. And that control doesn't just touch your beliefs, it creeps into your choices, your silence, your shame. You begin censoring yourself, not because you're unsure of your values, but because you've been made to feel unsafe for having them. But here's what the Stoics would say. Truth doesn't fear disagreement. Marcus Aurelius put it simply, the opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them knows anything about the subject. Real wisdom doesn't force itself into a room. It waits at the door with patience. It asks, what do you see? Not why don't you see like me? Because if your faith or your politics requires others to submit in order for you to feel whole, then what you worship isn't truth, it's ego. And when someone starts making you feel lesser for thinking differently, that's not conviction, that's emotional colonization. You are not required to become a mirror just to feel accepted. You are not selfish for stepping away from people who only love their reflection in you. Your identity is not up for negotiation. And your relationships should be safe spaces for curiosity, not courts for judgment. Sometimes it's not what they say. It's not even what they do. It's how you feel just before you see them. The tension in your shoulders, the shallow breath, the silent voice in your head whispering, here we go again. You check your phone twice before replying. You rehearse excuses before accepting their invite. And when you finally meet, you find yourself performing, editing who you are just to keep the peace. They might not raise their voice. They might not do anything obviously wrong, but every encounter feels like an emotional tax you didn't agree to pay. And yet, you stay because history, because they've been there for you, because they're not that bad. But here's the quiet truth no one likes to admit. Relationships don't need to be dramatic to be draining, and emotional weight doesn't need to be loud to be real. You walk away from them tired, not because of conflict, But because you've spent the whole interaction trying not to betray yourself, trying not to speak your mind, trying not to shift the mood, trying not to be too much, this kind of exhaustion is subtle, but over time, it reshapes your sense of self. And that's where the Stoics offer a mirror. He who lives in harmony with himself lives in harmony with the universe. Marcus Aurelius. If someone consistently disrupts your internal harmony, that's not chemistry, that's a red flag. Because connection isn't supposed to feel like emotional negotiation. You're not supposed to leave every conversation feeling like you just walk through a minefield of unspoken tension. Sometimes people grow apart, not because of betrayal, but because of transformation. You evolve, they remain. You seek peace, they cling to patterns. And that's okay. The bravest thing you can do is honor that truth without needing them to understand it. Closure doesn't always come in the form of conversation. Sometimes it comes from simply listening to your body, your energy, your intuition, and choosing to step back quietly before resentment turns into regret. Someone who's always drowning and expects you to rescue them every time. You pick up the call, and before you can say hello, it starts. The sigh, the rant, the list of everything that's gone wrong. Again, you brace yourself. You listen. You nod. You say, that must be hard. And deep down you hope, maybe this time they'll ask how I'm doing. But they don't. They never do. Because for them, you're not a person, you're a dumping ground. Every problem, every complaint, every bad decision, they unload it onto you like it's your emotional responsibility to carry it. And if you ever hesitate, if you ever say, I'm not in the space for this right now, they call you selfish, cold, unsupportive. But here's what no one tells you. Listening is an act of love. Being available is a gift, but being used is not a virtue. There's a difference between helping someone process pain and being used as a sponge for recycled suffering. These people don't want solutions. They don't want growth. They want sympathy without self-reflection. And the moment you stop nodding, the moment you suggest change, you become the bad friend, the distant one, the one who changed. But maybe that's true. Maybe you did change. Maybe you're tired of being their emotional crutch while they refuse to stand. And here's where the Stoic lens becomes a light. Seneca once said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." Some people aren't suffering from circumstances. They're addicted to victimhood. It gives them identity. It gives them attention. And most dangerously, it gives them permission to stay the same. But you're allowed to outgrow that cycle. You're allowed to say, my love for you doesn't mean I'll be your therapist. My empathy doesn't make me your outlet. Because real friendships are reciprocal. They flow, they give back, they breathe. You deserve spaces where your silence is also heard, where your pain isn't constantly sidelined by someone else's louder narrative. Helping is beautiful, but helping endlessly while being emptied, that's not support. That's slow self-erasure. Don't show up at all keeping their word. They say, I'll call you tomorrow. They don't. I promise I'll be there this time. They're not. And when you bring it up, they laugh. They say, you take things too seriously. Or worse, I forgot. Relax. But it's not about the call. It's not about being 5 minutes late. It's about the message behind the pattern. Because every broken promise, no matter how small, is a whisper, you don't matter as much as my convenience. And maybe you don't want to admit it. You tell yourself they have a lot going on. They didn't mean to. Maybe I'm expecting too much. But here's the quiet truth you've been avoiding. Consistency reveals character, and those who repeatedly disappoint you are repeatedly choosing to. They just don't say it out loud. Stoic philosophy treats a man's word as sacred. Epictetus wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." But when someone lives in contradiction, promising one thing, delivering another, they create a relationship built on sand. You begin to doubt your own expectations. You lower the bar. You stop asking, you stop trusting. Until one day you realize you're doing all the emotional labor just to keep the illusion of stability. But real connection isn't built on excuses. It's built on respect. And respect sounds like, I'll be there, and then actually being there. Because when someone values you, they make time. They show up. They remember, not perfectly, but intentionally. A person who can't keep their word won't keep your heart safe either. And while forgiveness is noble, repetition is a decision. You don't owe endless chances to someone who treats reliability like a joke. You don't have to beg to be prioritized. And you definitely don't have to explain why your time matters. Let them break promises with someone else. You've outgrown the role of understander-in-chief. You're not cold. You're finally warm to yourself. They're not stuck. They're just unwilling to move. You sit down with them, again, same tone, same sigh, same problem. You listen, again. You offer a new perspective, again. You say, "Have you tried?" They cut you off. I know. But it's complicated, but you don't understand. And that's when it hits you. They don't actually want change. They want comfort. They want to rehearse their pain, not release it. So the same story plays on loop, like an emotional rerun you never subscribed to. You start to feel guilty because you care, but also frustrated because it never goes anywhere. And the truth is, you're not a bad friend for getting tired. You're just waking up to the fact that emotional growth is a two-player game. One listens, the other moves. But this person, they've mistaken your empathy for endurance. They think you'll stay in the loop forever, nodding, supporting, sinking. Stoicism teaches us that suffering is a teacher, but only if the student is willing. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." But people like this don't want to face the way. They want someone to sit beside them and stare at the wall. And while you thought you were helping, you've actually been held hostage by their refusal to grow. You deserve relationships where growth is mutual, where struggles aren't weapons for sympathy, but starting points for change. Because repeating the same hurt without action isn't vulnerability, it's emotional stagnation. And if someone keeps choosing helplessness as their identity, you're allowed to choose distance as your boundary. You are not the emotional landfill for recycled pain. You're a living being, deserving of progress, reciprocity, and peace. Ego. The stories they repeat aren't about how they suffer, but how great they once were. And that, too, can quietly drain your spirit. Every time you meet, it starts the same way. A story about back then, their glory days, their accomplishments, how they used to be someone. You smile, nod, and try to stay present. But inside you feel distant, not because you don't respect their past, but because they never let you meet who they are now. Everything is filtered through nostalgia, through a version of themselves that's been polished and looped until it no longer reflects reality. And soon you realize they're not sharing memories. They're clinging to identity, because sometimes people wrap themselves in past success to avoid facing present emptiness. The Stoics warned against this illusion. Seneca wrote, "What is the point of dragging up sufferings that are over, of being miserable now because you were miserable then?" But it works both ways. Glorifying the past is just as dangerous as mourning it, because either way you're no longer living. You try to connect, to talk about the present, the future, growth, but the conversation keeps snapping back to who they were, who they used to be, what they could have done if, and you start to feel like a spectator in their museum, not a participant in a real relationship. Because the deeper truth is, people who constantly broadcast their past often do it to hide their present. And you've grown too much to stay trapped in someone else's time capsule. You need conversations that breathe, connections that evolve, not relationships stuck on repeat. It's okay to honor someone's past, but not at the cost of your present energy. What's wrong with them? What do I do now? With this clarity, let's end with that answer. So now you've seen the signs. Maybe you recognized one. Maybe you recognized all of them. And now a quiet question is forming in your chest. If I walk away, does that make me a bad person? The answer, number. It makes you an honest one. Honest enough to admit that love isn't supposed to leave you depleted, that loyalty isn't the same as endurance, that being a good person doesn't mean being endlessly available. Walking away isn't weakness, it's witnessing. It's finally seeing things as they are, not as you wish them to be. It doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you finally cared enough about yourself. The Stoics never taught us to run from pain, but they did teach us to let go of what we cannot control, to remain rooted even when the world around us spins. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And maybe strength in this season of your life looks like stepping away from people who quietly drain you. No fights, no drama, no explanation. Just space, just peace, just truth. You're not here to carry everyone. You're not here to be everything for everyone. You're here to grow, to protect your energy, to become the kind of person you can count on. Because at the end of the day, who stays is not nearly as important as who you become when you stop shrinking to keep others comfortable. So go, in love, in grace, in power. Cut the ties that quietly kill your spirit so that what's left can finally breathe. If this spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And in the comments, tell me, which sign hit you the hardest? I'll meet you there. Until then, hold your peace like it's sacred, because it is.